Hello, welcome for this new video on the Vijnana Bhairava tantra. Today we will see a verse that, as it happens sometimes, comes a little out of the line, a little off the line, but interesting one, nevertheless. Sanskrit first. Mâyā vimohinī nāma, kalāyāḥ kalanaṃ sthitam. Ityādidharmaṃ tattvānāṃ, kalayan pṛthag bhavet. Nāma, what is called Mâyā, magical illusion, vimohinī, and the enchantress, the one who's bound spelling everyone. Sthitam is in her truth. Kalanaṃ, the creative expression, kalāyāḥ, of the kalāyāḥ, the powers of the self, of the absolute, of universal consciousness, is the creative expression of the powers of universal consciousness. Mâyā is nothing but the magical play of universal consciousness. Iti, knowing that, realizing that, ityādidharmaṃ tattvānāṃ, thus those are just powers of the different levels of being. Kalayan, understanding that, na pṛthag bhavet, one should not see them as separate from oneself. So here it's not very clear, and there are several readings, because there is one reading, one should understand those powers to be just attributes of the different levels of being, having nothing to do with the self. So that would be a dualistic interpretation along the lines of Sankhya philosophy, and the word kalanaṃ, kalayan would be supporting that interpretation, because that kalayan in the sense of counting is synonymous with Sankhya, which means a complete review, complete counting the whole of a group, all the tattvas. And the idea is that by becoming aware of all the levels of being, of nature, of what is, one realizes oneself as being beyond what is, being the purusha, the pure consciousness, separate, pṛthag, separate from all the tattvas, from all the objective contents of consciousness. Consciousness is separate from all her contents. So that would be Samkhya, dualistic interpretation. But then there is also the reading chosen by Shivopadhyaya, na pṛthag bhavet. So one should understand that Mâyā, the creative dynamism, the creative activity, the creative work that we call Mâyā, the magical play of Mâyā, is nothing but the power, the play of the powers of universal consciousness, and I am universal consciousness. So Mâyā is not separate from me, it's just the play of my powers, just like the waves in the ocean. That's the idea here. Shivopadhyaya gives a quite complex interpretation. Kalāyāḥ kalātattvāsya kinchit kalanaṃ dharmaḥ. So, play of the powers would mean the play of the power of the principle of kala, which is one of the five kanchukas, the five constrainers of consciousness in her individual state, keeping her in her incarnated individual state, and it is kinchit kalanaṃ dharmaḥ. It is the power to do only limited things, limited power of action. It is a contraction of kriya shakti, the omnipotency, unlimited power of action. But here it is kala tattvāsya, so it is kala in singular, but in the text it's kalāyāḥ. No, it is okay. It is the power. It is kala, but kala then would be kala tattvāsya. But then, what would it mean? Yes, then he says that ityādidharmaṃ would mean the other four kanchukas. Vidya tattvāsya kinchit vedanam dharmaḥ ityādi sarvesham tattvānāṃ. So, of all the tattvas, it would mean chiefly the implicit, implied tattvas, or the five kanchukas. Well, Vimrishan, realizing that Purushaha pṛthag na bhavet, yes, the opposite of Sankhya. One does not necessarily understand very well why realizing the five kanchukas would mean realizing they're not separate from the Purusha, from pure consciousness. Well, it's not very clear what he is saying there, but that verse is not very clear. And Ananda says that Mâyā is the one who betrays, who throws everyone into confusion at every level of being. Vimohinī nāma tattvānāṃ. And he just mainly repeats na purushaha pṛthag bhavet. So here he underscores that one should not interpret that relationship between tattvas and purusha along the line of dualistic Sankhya, because again, na purushaha pṛthag bhavet, sarvotirnaha kūtastha ityādidharmaṃ syāt. Okay, so one should realize that purushaha is not separate from the kala, from Mâyā, that is operating at all the levels of being, of all the tattvas. But he does not say why exactly, and Shivopadhyaya does not say why either. So this is not very clear according to what they say, but if one wants to say that Mâyā is not separate from universal consciousness, then this is not very difficult, not very complicated, because according to Kashmir Shaivism, the dharmas, the powers, the attribute of the thing, like the power of the fire, to burn, to illuminate, to give light and to dry up and so on, are not separate from the dharmin, the dharmi, the one who has those powers. Because, for example, fire is nothing but the collection of its properties, of its powers, of what it can do. A thing is what that thing can do. To be a thing is to be a cause. It's also a principle of Western scholastics, taken up by Spinoza, for example. A thing is the sum of its powers. So to know something is to know what that thing can do, and therefore to know universal consciousness is to know the powers of universal consciousness, and it is to know the different levels of being, because the different tattvas, the so-called 36 tattvas, are the different powers, the different states, the different effects, the different facets, if you will, of consciousness. So to know consciousness is to know those different levels, and this is what Abhinavagupta is explaining in the first chapter of his Tantra Loka. If you know only one tattva, only one state of consciousness, be it transcendent, then you have limited knowledge. Real knowledge, true knowledge, is whole knowledge, knowledge of all the aspects of consciousness, of all the states of consciousness, of all its manifestations, of all its powers. And contraction, alienation, the state of pashu, samsari, is limited knowledge. And what the Trika teaching has to offer is the complete knowledge, full awareness, full consciousness, fully expanded consciousness. So that verse is a little bit a philosophical verse, but it does not square very well. One can suppose that there is something in the reading. Maybe after all, it was that verse was originally a Samkhya kind of a verse included here, and maybe. And anyway, with a Kashmiri Shaiva rewarding interpretation of it, it would mean that one has to realize that all experiences are powers of the one universal consciousness, not separate, just like powers are not separate from the one who has those powers, just like the waves are not separate from the ocean. That's all for today. Thank you for listening, and see you for another video.